Please welcome Dobbie Wiegardt.
Here's a chair, I don't need it. I thought Bud Golder's talk was incredible. I really appreciate it. I've had a guilty conscience for 2 weeks. He took the heat for all the cattle being his. I confess a few times those were my cattle. I get that off my shoulder. In researching and remembering for this talk, I had to delve into some things, and one of them was about John Douglas. John Douglas was a cooper on a sailing ship that came into Astoria in the winter, and then would go off to Hawaii. Well, he came in around mid-1840s and explored around, thought this is a pretty nice place. And he thought maybe he'd like to come back someday. Well, he went to Hawaii, and in the midst of the whaling, a big barrel rolled on his leg and injured him, so excuse me, so he couldn't work anymore. He came back to Astoria, and he came over here and took out a donation land claim of 320 acres just south of Oysterville. And I have an old map here from 1894 if anyone wants to look at it. And it shows that donation land claim with the old Sand Ridge Road going up part way. Well, he married a Native American woman, and I think he died in 1878. And in the mid-1950s, the local people here decided this was a pretty important man. So they put a grave in the Oysterville Cemetery for him, not knowing where he was buried. But it gives you an idea of the importance that he had. Well, for a little bit of family history, my grandfather Heinrich was born in Schleswig-Holstein in about 1848. That was an area next to Germany, which Germany had annexed. And there was a large family. They never had enough food to eat. And at 11 years old, if you can imagine that, he snuck off to Hamburg and signed up as a cabin boy on an English naval vessel. Well, he worked his way up to be able-bodied seaman, and it ended up on the sailing ships that came around South America to collect the guano, which is, you know, bird manure and very potent. And he said there was no experience like being becalmed on an guano ship in the tropics. And to get relief, they would actually climb up in the rigging and tie themselves in. And for food, they had salt beef, which was many times horse meat, and hardtack. And the hardtack would often have weevils. So the guys that were a little fussy about their diet, they would put the hardtack on the stove and the weevils would crawl out. Well, they said he never complained about this, was accepted. And I'm sure other settlers who came here went through similar experiences. He did get shipwrecked on the coast of Chile. For 3 months, they were marooned on an island. They said they had to stand back to back to keep the rats off. They licked the moisture off the rocks. Eventually, they were picked up by another sailing boat. He ended up in Peru, in the Peruvian Navy, if you can imagine that. Tired of that, jumped ship, ended up in San Francisco, and when he got there, they said, you have to get back to Germany and do your military service. He didn't want to do that, he jumped ship again. And there was an oyster company there in San Francisco Bay, which Tucker Walksmith's grandfather worked for. And Candy McGee over here, of the Nelson family, Charles Nelson, were working for the Morgan Oyster Company. Well, they worked Grandpa worked for them for a while, and then they needed help up here in Willapa Bay. So he came up here, went to Astoria, and he settled in this area in Upper Town, which is just south of town. And for Cindy's edification, and in her own words, it was settled in 1846, before Oysterville. So, Grandpa was here for a while. Then he saved enough money and went across to Bruceport, bought a house, and he was a friend of the lighthouse keeper, I think of Mr. Anderson at Cape Disappointment. And in the meantime, my grandmother, to be, came from Denmark. She came over to be babysitter for the lighthouse keeper at Cape Disappointment. Well, Grandpa was in Bruceport, she was in Cape D. He would row down the bay, go overland to Cape Disappointment, and when he first saw her, he says, "This is a girl for me." Well, he rowed back and forth 3 times, and then said, "Forget the rowing, let's get married." And he got married, moved to Bruceport, had 6 children. He was oystering there, and for help he would hire Native Americans and the Chinese people. They'd come in the summer and work there. The building they had for a home was an old hotel. The story was that if they needed something to eat, he'd go open the kitchen window and shoot some ducks. The story was, he'd go out on the sailing boat. I've got a picture here. He had a oyster plunger. And he'd take my older uncles. My dad was the youngest of the 6 kids, and Fred and John, my uncles, would go out with Grandpa oystering. And Grandpa never talked much, they said. And the only way they knew he was going to go back to Bruceport was he quit adding coffee grounds to the coffee pot. Well, finally they were the last white family over there. And by the way, there is an old cemetery above Bruceport. As a kid, we'd go over to the Pioneer Picnic, and family would always have to take us up, show us the old cemetery. But it is up there, it's probably overgrown now. But in 1897, or 98, my dad was just born, they moved to Nakata and built the house where my son Eric has his art gallery. And so that's how the family got over here. While they were in Bruceport, Grandma's sister was married to Mr. Fredricksen over on North River. And that was just across the Willapa River and the bay from Bruceport. So they saw each other. Well, they had a farm there, and the neighbor wanted to buy it. Well, Grandma's sister and husband came up missing, and after a long story, they were murdered. And Grandma's sister was buried in the neighbor's pig pen. They found her. And her brother-in-law, Mr. Fredricksen, was found in a path where the cows trod. Well, there was a trial eventually. A family story, and family didn't talk about this hardly at all. I didn't know anything for years. But the story that I remember is that the neighbor's wife came to visit Grandma after the murder and saw her sister's ring on the neighbor's wife's hand. But after a trial, 4 people were convicted, 2 were kept over in others. Well, I think they're all over in the other jail. And then the conviction was appealed, and the court said, there's got to be another trial. And so they brought 2 of the 4 convicted people over here to the jail in Oysterville. And 2 were someplace else across the bay. Well, apparently a Vigilante Group felt that they were justice wasn't being served. They came over here and actually shot and killed the 2 that were in the jail here. That jail is now in South Bend, right next to an old steam donkey, just beyond the H&H Cafe. If you go by, you'll see the little thing. And there's quite a story about how they got into the jail and finally ricocheted the bullets around and killed them. Anyway, that's part of family history. The name Rose came up, and they're no relation to any of the Roses in the county. But as I mentioned, this wasn't talked about in the family, and I knew nothing about it for years. Well, when my dad grew up, he started working for the railroad when he was 17, laying ties and putting down the bed. Then he worked his way up to fireman, and night watchman, and then fireman. And some of his stories, I'll tell you, the train went from Nakata to Megler. And one of his favorite stories was as they were going through the tunnel, they looked ahead and there was a trestle on a little platform up over the west end of the Columbia River, the tunnel. And it was a Sunday, and there were 2 women that had walked up there, and they were in their white Sunday clothes. And the way you clean out a boiler is you throw the abrasive in there, and it blows the soot out. So as they spotted these ladies, and I don't know, Lou Stamp from Nakata was Dad's the engineer, and it could have been Lou was with him at the time. And Dad said, "Should we?" So just as they got to the house, Dad threw in all this crazy sand, and the soot goes out right over these women. Dad figured they'd get fired, but he never heard anything about it. Another story is that his crew went up to Megler, and they lived there in a little shack, because that was the end of the rail. And one night, an owl killed a skunk right on their front porch. Another story is that he used to have the engineers stop the train just east of Chinook to pick wildflowers, because he was courting my mother, who was from Chinook, and whose father was Jasper Prest, who was from Denmark also. And they said he said when they would come by the old Loomis house south of Clipson, they had lots of turkeys running around back and forth over the tracks, and they'd kind of time the train so they'd maybe hit a turkey. On the way back, they'd stop and pick up the dead turkeys. Crazy stories like that. Well, there was an immigrant by the name of Wallkoski, and he lived in Uppertown. Lo and behold, that's where we live now. He was from Germany. He married a Native American woman, had 10 kids. I think from the stories, he's pretty cantankerous, and for some reason she left him. But as a child, we would go visit Mr. Wallkoski because he liked my dad and he trusted my dad. He did not trust banks, and any cash he had, he would give to my dad, and then when he needed money, he'd go back to Dad. A story is that Mr. Espy had a coach or a wagon. He would always offer to pick up Mr. Wallkoski because he had no transportation. And he'd always refuse riding with Mr. Espy. Well, one time, Mr. Wallkoski was late for a funeral. And Mr. Espy graciously stopped and offered him a ride. And by golly, he got in. And when he got to the other end, he says, just because I rode with you doesn't mean I like you. I can remember going down there with Dad, and we cut hay, and he had a little cranberry bog. It wasn't any good because on these big high December tides, 10-foot tides, the salt water come in and cover it. Well, when I was growing up, my mother, she had a teaching degree, and she had gone to Jefferson High School in Portland. She grew up in Chinook, in the big house that John Heckes has now, that beautiful 3-story house right by the road into the hatchery. That was my grandmother's, grandpa's place. Well, my mother, having gone to Portland, she enjoyed the Portland culture, and she thought, we kids, I have 2 older sisters, she thought we need a little culture. So, with Aunt Lily and Jack, my cousin, they took us up to Portland overnight on the stern wheeler. Now, talk about a miserable trip. No beds, overnight trip. All they had was benches and wicker chairs. Try to sleep in a wicker chair. Slide out. I met with my sisters this weekend, and we relived some of these things. And they said they gave us blankets to sleep in. But, oh, it was miserable. Well, we get to Portland, and then Mom wants us to introduce us to the theater. Okay, we go, big theater, we were way up in the back. That was okay, you know, we saw the movie. And then the movie went off, and on comes a cowboy and a horse. And the cowboy sings, Home on the Range. Well, when the horse and the cowboy left, I guess they had a fly problem, because out comes this woman with these 2 big fly swatters. Her name was Sally Rand. And she was dancing around on the stage, you know, trying to kill these flies. And it wouldn't land on her, she'd go like this. Well, I could tell by the shocked look on my mom's face that she didn't like the way they kill flies. And my sister told me, and I don't remember this, that she figured the next night things would be clear. They took us back, same thing again. Well, then another culture trip. We had to see the fleet come in, the Navy fleet, this before World War II. The Navy fleet used to come in over the bar and go up to Portland. Lots of Navy ships for the Rose Festival. Well, we had to go see that, just had to. So they picked us, we all went down in an open truck before daylight, and we drove up to the Cape, and there we are sitting, wait, northwest wind blowing with fog, we're cold, we wait, and we wait, and we wait, finally the fleet comes. Another miserable trip. Well, what did we do as a kid? Growing up as a kid was kind of interspersed with World War II, but I'll talk first I'll talk about what we did as kids. We'd pick cranberries. We'd go down Charlie Nelson's bog on Joe Johns Avenue, and they picked them by hand. And Charlie would make a lane out, and you pick all the cranberries in that lane, and you get 25 cents a measure, a box like that. Everybody duck hunted. We could hunt all over. There weren't many people along the bay, so we could hunt there and in the marshes. Charlie Nelson, who lived right across the street, I was born and raised in the house right south across the road from the Charles Nelson bed and breakfast. That was my folks' house. And Charlie Nelson was a good neighbor and almost like a father to me. I got an education on ice. One winter I went over to Charlie's, and he had this little fish pond, about 10 feet long, 4 or 5 feet wide, and with all these goldfish. Well, it froze over, and I couldn't figure out how the goldfish were going to breathe. So I put my foot out, you know, a little further, cracked the ice. Boom, I go right in. Made my way to the end, took off over the fence and got home. And I got there and I said, "Charlie, push me in." Mom said, she'd been watching the whole thing, she said, "That old Mr. Charlie's awful." Well, Charlie shared with me Chief Nakati's campsite at the end of Bay Avenue. Come straight from Ocean Park, go down to Bay, and that was his campsite. And Charlie says, "Now we'll go down right after high water, when the waves have been washing, and we'll look for arrowheads." And every once in a while you find an arrowhead. And he had quite a few artifacts in his house. Bud talked about him last week. I found one of Dad's interviews, and he was talking about tough times. I was born in '31, but this was the Depression time, and he was talking about, you know, times were tough. He would, we always had 1 or 2 milk cows. He would go to Ocean Park, sell a quart of milk for 10 cents, and he sold vegetables. We had a huge garden, a couple cows, a pig, chickens, ducks, raised our own hay, but we were never hungry, you know. There's plenty of things you could do. Dad hunted, of course. He loved to hunt, and we could get some food that way. But we had our own beef. One other thing we did, in the spring there'd be a freshet. Logs would come down the Columbia, come onto the beach. No chainsaws in, but we burned firewood, and Dad had one of these big old saws, and I'd get on the end of that, go back and forth with him, and we'd look for fir logs that were about that size, and then cut them in about 6-foot lengths, and then we took the wedge and sledge and we quarter them and throw them on the back of the truck, bring them home, stack them, and then in the fall Johnny Moorhead would come with his tractor, his buzzsaw, and we'd make a day of it cutting that wood. Oh, it smells so good. One other thing we did as kids, we peeled Cascara. Now, Cascara Bark was used as a laxative, and that's why they peeled it. I cut this small limb just so I can get it here, but sometimes you get trees that big, and you make a gouge like that, and then you go around, and in the spring, you can get your hand in there and that'll pop off. And then you get a chunk of bark, and you take it in, put it under cover, and let it dry. And that's what this is. This is the bark from this piece. And then hopefully you could sell it before it got all moldy and rotted. Another thing we did, and I imagine a lot of people have never seen this. We would collect this for Christmas decorations. This is local. Not going to tell you where I got it. This grows in the shade on top of moss. It's called Elkhorn Moss. And I think a lot of people who have lived here all their life probably never seen it. That's what that is. And then the demo. This is crabapple, native crabapple. Very good bunch of apples this year, but it's very spiny, and got a couple stories about that. Now we used to fish a lot for salmon on the Columbia River. The Andrews family in Nakata were some of the first. They had a red canoe, and they actually went out and fished on the Columbia River, about where the bridge is there in Chinook and Fort Columbia. And then my dad got made a little 11-foot plywood skiff, and the sides were only about that high. And he called it the Blitzkrieg because that was a big term during World War II. But anyway, we fished a lot, and if we catch a salmon, he had the kneel on it to keep it from flopping back out. And we did not use nets in. Everybody used a calf hook. And you'd hit them in the head and pull them on board. I guess the fish were probably too big at that time for a net. And I remember seeing the first fishermen who were mooching with herring and think, oh, who are those weird guys, you know. But we used to go right along there by Fort Columbia from Chinook up to Megler, and we caught a lot of nice fish in there. We also would go over to Nacelle and trout fish. Another bit of my culture learning was Dad had an old, about a 12-horse Evinrude motor, and thing would run like a watch in a barrel. Put it on the boat and get it in the water, it wouldn't start. That's when I learned, when I heard my first swear words. Oh boy, that was a miserable piece of machinery. Okay, what happened during World War II, started out December 7th, 1941. My dad and I were up duck hunting at Grassy Island. No way to get a hold of Dad. He was commander of the American Legion. When the word came out about the bombing, they tried to get a hold of Dad because they wanted to get something organized. Things were pretty exciting then. Immediately they started organizing things, and they formed a home guard in Ocean Park. And so we'd go out there and learn. And I was 10 years old. We went out and learned close order drill, and this is my defense weapon. Single shot 22. That's what I use. Still works. My sister, later on, when they got more military here, they started having USO dances. And my sisters were teenage girls, and so they'd go to the USO dances, and the military would come by and pick them up in a truck. And I didn't know this, but their mothers were the chaperones. And they would take them down the Cranberry Road to the barracks there, or to Fort Columbia or Fort Canby, and dance. And I don't know if Lee Crowley is here today. I don't see him. But I did hear something from my sisters that Lee Crowley might not know that the Crowley girls were beautiful. I mean, they were really pretty girls. Father wouldn't let them out. Well, my sister Ann's classmate was Eva Jean Crowley. They said she used to sneak out at night and go to dances. And I didn't know if Lee knew that or not. I remember being in the Methodist Church in Ocean Park right next to the beach one Sunday and heard a patrol plane fly by and then an explosion. And I'm not sure on the timing, but it seems to me, not too long thereafter, a 54-foot sperm whale came ashore. And my dad was out beachcombing, and he was first man to the whale. And he took his axe and cut a section of the jaw out with 14 teeth in it. And teeth like that, you know. He brought it home, threw it on the ant pile, and let the ants eat the flesh away, so that exposed the teeth. It was pretty exciting around here. My Aunt Anna's stepson was in the Coast Guard and an officer, and he had something to do with maintaining the Coast Guard line up and down the coast. So he came to Nakata with another Coast Guard enlisted man with a boat, a skiff of some sort. They had, I guess they had a machine gun on it. Well, he had to go to Tokeland. Well, it must have been in the middle of winter when the brant are out in the bay. Now, the brant are, to me, the most delectable waterfowl to eat. And he was a hunter, so he knew what brant were. Well, going up the bay, he saw these brant, and he said, let's get some. So he opened up with a machine gun. He got a couple, and he told the seaman, throw them under the tarp. Well, they went on up to Tokeland, did their business, came back in Nakata, and he said all hell had broken loose. There were military people. They say we're being invaded. So he said, let's get out of here. We used to see a lot of fighter planes. The Saleno, south of Oysterville, was an old wooden ship. And P-38s and P-40s, they would use the Saleno for a target, the machine gun. And they'd strafe it, and then the local kids would go out and collect all the 50 caliber brass empty shells. Another target was up at the tip of the peninsula, right by Grassy Island. It looked like a pyramid. And they would send the bombers over to try to drop a dummy bomb, I don't know, filled with water, sand, or powder, whatever, to hit that. And we, more than once, I think our oyster crews were out there floating around, and I guess they dropped their bombs on them one time, because they were only about a mile away from the target. Fortunately, they missed it. Another thing that happened was there were PBY planes, the float planes, the large ones stationed at Tongue Point, and that's just upriver from Astoria, and they would come over and touch and go landing in the bay right there by Moby Dick Hotel. They had rationing during World War II. Meat, sugar, I think butter. You had to get a ration card. Oh, and gas, that was rationed. Torvald Tronson had this store out there in Ocean Park where Jack's is, and every once in a while you sneak in there and he'd give you a Hershey chocolate bar. Oh, Coast Guard at Moby Dick. They were patrolling, the beach was closed, so they brought in the Coast Guard, and they barracks them at Moby Dick Hotel, and they built stalls and barracks and barns for Coast Guard horses. And they would patrol the beach at night with big radios on their back and spend all night out there going back and forth. And eventually they got police dogs to go with them. Well, where I grew up was only about 2 blocks away from Moby Dick. Well, these dogs would howl all night, and my dad would get up early by then to go milk the cows. By then, things had calmed down with the dogs. He'd let out a yip and boo, they don't go. See, and he enjoyed doing that. As students in school, we bought war bonds. They'd sell them right in school. We could go to Chinook as kids and walk up behind Fort Columbia on a trail to a military lookout over the mouth of the Columbia River. And the military let us up there, but they were, you know, watching for whatever might come in the river. Now, about 6 weeks ago, I was in church, and after church, a woman from Spokane who was visiting came and said, "You know anything about World War II?" I said, "Well, I guess." And she said her father was in the Coast Guard, and he was doing something with electronics, the new, and she said he pinpointed the Japanese sub that was off the coast, which eventually shelled Fort Stevens, tried to shell Fort Stevens. And he called the Army commander over at Fort Stevens, and he wouldn't pay any attention to him because he was in a different branch of the military. That's her story. During the war, you know, a lot of the guys left, so there wasn't much help. So at 10 years old, my cousins and I went in the cannery, and we were shucking oysters. And then we'd go out up Stackpole and we'd scatter oysters. And even the girls like Beth Tronson, my classmate, would go up and scatter oysters. Well, that was about a mile from this bomb target. And so this is, you know, scattering oysters is probably the most miserable job you could ever have. And it was great when we knew the bombers were coming because we could watch. Well, Uncle Fred, who was managing the crew, made us face away from the target. So we saw all this bombing looking back upside we had 4-H then. We had a victory garden. About this time, well, when I got to be a teenager, they had a bounty, if you can believe this. They had a bounty on harbor seals. They wanted to get rid of them. So we could shoot them, except to prove you had to scalp them. Not fun. Another thing I did as a kid, just I see a note here, is Bill William Begg is an ancestor. Where are you? Here he is. He's one of the ancestors. He came in on the Glenmore, the Shipwreck, married a local lady, and as a kid I would go visit him, and he was from Scotland. And he would have records of these bagpipe music, so. Later on, in the 50s, well, let's see, about 48, we had a real good softball team here in Ocean Park, and Ocean Park Chamber. And the reason it was such a good team was we had 2 good pitchers. One was Alan Westfall. And Sturgis, you need a seat, or Pam?
No, Pam, right here.
Is she here? Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Well, after the war was over, I decided to go to Washington State University, Washington State College at that time, and there were only 5,000 students there. And when my dad found out I was going over there, he said, well, you know, we don't have any place to hunt pheasants. You meet up with a wheat rancher's daughter. And because we got all, we can deer hunt, we can duck hunt, but we can't pheasant hunt. Which sounds good to me. So anyway, I joined a fraternity, and after a year, we had what you call after dinner dances. And we went to the Delta Gamma house, and we were dancing, and I remember looking across the room at this gorgeous blonde. I thought, oh man. So, I don't know if I danced with her or not, but I knew some of the other sorority girls in there, and I called them up. I said, who is that? I said, she lives off campus. But she grew up on a wheat ranch. Wow. So I got my courage up, called her up, and asked her out for a coat date. That was a big deal then. And you go to the Cougar Cottage, and I guess you eat and drink Coke, I don't know. And then you go back, take them back to their house. Well, she was living down on Stadium Way off campus. It was raining. Of course, she had a coat on. After the Coke date, I took her home and went down past Boulder Gym and over a hill that was Sweet Stubble, which is now a dorm, over the hill to her house. Raining. Open the door, and out comes this smell of fried chicken. Well, and you knew it was gravy, and being a farmer's wife, you knew there was real food in there. And my date says, bye. I walked back in the rain. And I remember thinking, is this love or what is it? Well, after being there for a couple of years, we did date a little bit, and she had a boyfriend that she met in high school, and you know, things were really shaky, and they tried some other dates. Anyway, I had told Guy Allison, who built a wreckage in Ocean Park, that I might like to go into the Foreign Service as a career. And so he told me, well, if you want that, go to George Washington University or Georgetown in Washington, D.C. So I went back to George Washington, and I took a class in English composition. There were only about 13, 14 of us in the class. Teacher up here, I was sitting here, another guy here, and then right next to him was this suave, highly educated, low-talking gal. You know, she looked pretty good. I mean, wasn't going good on the wheat ranch. So I was thinking, okay, now, obviously she's from the East Coast. But what hasn't she seen if I ask her out for a date? Well, she hadn't heard obviously about seal hunting. I could tell her about going with my Chinook cousins bear hunting, or clam digging, or about the peninsula. Well, I was just about ready to ask her out, and I got a letter from the wheat rancher's daughter. Things were not going well with the old boyfriend. Well, I've been playing touch football at the base of the Washington Monument, and I've been to the Smithsonian and all that stuff. The Puerto Ricans tried to shoot Harry Truman at Blair House. I thought, you know, this is just not my lifestyle. And then I got the letter from Lila, girl, and things were looking good at home. So I said, I'm out of here after the end of the semester. I went back to Washington State. Well, don't worry about this suave gal. Her name was Jacqueline Bouvier. She had to settle for being wife of the president. But the end of the story is Sue and Ann Holloway's sister, Kathy, went to New York to take music lessons, and she ended up working with Jackie Kennedy's kids. So she can probably tell some stories. Okay, I got some duck hunting stories. I know you're all here to hear these. I've got a few favorites. You know, we used to hunt, like I mentioned, the bays and marshes. Barbara Polshock told me one of the classic stories. She said, my husband Norm loved duck hunting. Patient. Well, when you go duck hunting nowadays, you go sit in a duck blind, you know, and you're still, you don't move because the ducks will see you from a mile away. So you sit real quiet. And she said her husband Norman sat in this duck blind all day, and at the end of the day, a spider had built a web between his knees. Another favorite story. The Morton Lightning seamen lived between Nakata and Sunshine on the other side of the bay. And they were, you know, the old Pioneer family, Gary Wilson's great uncles, I think. But they could tell stories, you just were wonderful. And in the old days, you know, they did a lot of commercial hunting, and they thought nothing of shooting ducks sitting on the water, because that's how you got them, you know, when their heads are up. And they told a story that they were going to shoot these ducks, and the ducks jumped just before they shot, and all they got was a sack full of legs. I asked, well, we were out in the scow shack. Now that's another cultural adventure. You go out, take oysters and scows. Well, you go out early while the tide's in, push your scow to where you want to pick your oysters. The scow will settle down with the water. You put poles down. But meantime, while you're waiting for the tide to go out, you go to the scow shack. And here are all these guys sitting around for maybe an hour waiting for the tide to go out. Well, at the time I was doing it, we had these World War II veterans and then these high school kids, you know, so we really got an education. And one story I remember, now the Slagle family, I mentioned their name in Ocean Park, they were the funniest family. Every one of them could tell the best stories you've ever heard. You didn't know if they were true or not, but they were just great stories. Well, Sam Slagle was married to Vera, and Vera was riding a motorcycle, and somebody said, Sam, can Vera ride a motorcycle very fast? He said, let me tell you. We were in Ocean Park one day. We decided to go to Long Beach. She took off, and we would meet at a restaurant. And she took off on the motorcycle. I followed her in the car. And by the time I got to Long Beach, she'd already eaten a hamburger. You can't dream up stuff like that. And then I asked another, these are my favorite stories, I asked another guy, did you ever hunt ducks in Skating Lake, which is right out here? And the crabapple, which is like going through barbed wire. He said, yeah, I hunted ducks out there. He said, we got a mess of mallards. We threw them over our shoulder, and by the time we got out, their necks were 6 feet long and they were all picked. Now, we hunt down on our property, really love it. Son Eric's over in Madeira Island teaching a class now, but everything revolves around that he gets home 2 days before duck hunt, because he'd sit out there all day and never paint a picture if he could. We like to call ourselves a halfway house for washed up duck hunters. We like to find guys that can no longer cut the mustard and go out and hunt, because there are not many places to hunt except clear up the point. That's really hard work. So we like to find these duck hunters that have given up hunting because it's just too much. So we can drive them right to the duck blind, let them get out, walk into the duck blind, and pick them up at the end of the day. So that's what we like to do, if we can find somebody. Another phenomenon, when Brian Kimmer's here, and he agrees with me on this, is that we're hunting with bald eagles now. There are so many bald eagles that during hunting season, they're patrolling the shoreline. If you shoot a duck, you better get it right away, because these bald eagles will swoop in and get it. And Brian thinks that they're listening for the shots. And when they hear the shots, they come. Well, what time is it? Oh, okay, I got an Oysterville story. Charles Nelson came in the 1870 up here to work. My grandpa came in 1874. Two of my granddaughters went to Washington State University. And one of them met a guy from Hawkinson. They ended up getting married. Turns out that Charles Nelson was his, I think, great-great-grandfather. If that wasn't enough, her sister married the other brother. I'm not going to pass around any pictures, but this is the result. Her picture's up there. I brought some old Upper Town bottles for consumption and lung troubles. We had one bottle, I couldn't put my hands on it, for system renovator and blood purifying syrup. I think this is Virginia Dare extract. Another Castoria, 8 bottle, and a brass shotgun shell. So I have some old family photographs. I'm not going to pass them around. I have a map here from 1894, City County, and I guess I'm out of time.
What's the pipe?
Pardon?
The pipe.
That pipe right there.
This?
Underneath the picture.
Oh, yeah, we found that down in Upper Town. It's a McDougal clay pipe. All right.
Okay, I understand that You set up your own little farmer's market out.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Would you like to tell us something about that?
Yeah, oh, well, because it's John Douglas's 170th anniversary. These vegetables were grown on John Douglas's donation land claim. And basically, we've got 32 zucchini plants. But feel free, take all you want. It's out here in the pickup, so help yourself.
I'm sure there are some questions, but before the questions, I have a story.
Yeah.
This is not a Dobbie story. This is a Todd story. Do you all know Dobbie and Lila's son Todd? Wave your hand, Todd. Okay. Todd is back home from having spent an illustrious career at a very famous nursery in North Carolina. He's also been involved in parking for the rod run and also kind of concerned about traffic control. And so he told me that he was talking to one of the other officers of traffic control and wondering how they were doing with rod run. He said, not a problem, we got it fixed. There was so much traffic in Oysterville last Thursday that we got that under control and we can handle anything. Thank you, Tom.
I'd like Todd to tell an Oysterville story, a couple when he worked for Rose Glenn when he was growing up. And Todd, do you want to tell Rose stories?
Well, I'll think of one real quick. But so Rose Glenn lived right on the other south side of the church here, and in high school I started working with her and helping her with her yard, starting to fix it up. And we found the old well that was there next to the church, and it was covered in plums and crab apple and flowering almond and all that. And she left to go do something in town. So I thought, I'm going to see what's in this well. So, just one of these small wells. And I started pulling out, and it was all full of bottles. So I pulled all the bottles out, and I counted them. There were 86 bottles in there. So I put them all back in. Put them in the well, got it all picked in there, and put the dirt back kind of on top. And Rose came back from town doing her thing and came back out. She would kind of work with me out there. And I said, "Hey Rose, let's look in the well and see what's in there." She said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Well, it looks like a bunch of bottles. Let's bet how many bottles are there." So she said, "Okay, well, what do we want to bet?" And I said, "Well, how about we bet your car?" And she drove. Rose was a tiny little gal, and she drove this humongous white Cadillac, about as big as a barge. And she said, "Sure, okay, I'll bet you my Cadillac." And I said, "Okay, well, if I'm the closest, I get the Cadillac. If not, you can keep it, and I'll keep working for you." And so she said, "Okay." So sure enough, I guessed 86. She got something like 20. So in that, I won her Cadillac. And I was going to college that fall. So I said, "Well, let's make a deal on this. It's my Cadillac. You can borrow it. And when I come home from school, spring and fall breaks and things like that, then it's mine." And so that was our agreement. So whenever I would come home from college, I would call her up and ask her how my Cadillac was doing. But she could keep it, and I would come down if I needed it.
Tell her that other one about the plant. Huh? Well, Todd came home one day when he was working up there, and he was laughing. Rose wasn't very big, but proper and a bun on her head. He was laughing. He said, Rose, they were in the yard, and Rose pointed to that plant and says, "You see that plant? You touch it, I'll rip your head off." All right.
I have a question though. I expected to hear a little bit more about oysters and in your heritage. I heard bits and pieces. I like chronology and detail. How did that?
Well, a lot's been written. I purposely didn't say much because a lot has been documented and put on tape, and then Sydney's written a lot about the oyster industry, and there's so much to say. You could go on forever with that. I knew I had to limit the talk to 45 minutes. Who told you that? 45 minutes, 15 minutes of question. But anyway, just to summarize it, looking through Dad's stuff, he got fired from the railroad, and so they needed to. Uncle John went to Alaska to be in the gold rush. They all came back. They decided to make a clam cannery in Ocean Park. Got an old cannery up at Tokeland, built it, packed some stuff together. So that in the spring they would can clams. Now the cannery was right next on Bay Avenue, right next to the old family home where Eric has his art gallery. It was right there. And then in the fall, they would can salmon, and he said they were working around the clock, you know. He had to fire up and milk cows and all that. And in between, they do salmon eggs, and then gradually, when the oysters came in, they started doing that. But then during World War II, they had a contract with the military. Dad said that the inspector for the military would come, and he had to stamp all the oysters. He'd give them the stamp, go to the tavern all day, and then come back and get a stamp. Then after World War II was over, they canned smoked oysters, canned oysters, and oyster stew. And that went on until after the Korean War. When the Korean War was over, the Korean government got in, helped their industry. It was almost impossible to compete. So then we got back into the fresh oysters again, and eventually moved over to Jolly Roger, and that's what the family's operating now. The family is into the 5th generation. I was 3rd generation. And years ago we were told that our family didn't start first in the oyster industry, but continuously we'd been in it longer than any family in the country. But there's a lot documented, and so much to tell that that's why I didn't say much. Okay.
Another story.
Yeah, you could talk all day on that. I want to tell some of these good stories.
Any other stories? David has either a question or maybe a story.
Yeah, it's kind of a request. We can close out on this, but I bet all my good neighbors $50 each that you could stand in that doorway with that .22 and shoot a duck first shot in the face.
No problem.
Are you willing to?
Is there an answer to that?
Yeah,
Pick up the .22.
Dave's one of my washed up duck hunters.
Dobbie never made it.
He's retired now, so I think I'll be seeing more of it. By the way, Dave, oh, I got a good story too. John Douglas donation, the piece of land, I want to tell you about the piece of land that we're living on, which is 28 acres, which was part of the John Douglas donation land claim at Wallkoski's. Well, I didn't mention that Wallkoski gave that piece of land to my dad and his brothers when he died. And that's how we got it. But now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, on that piece of property, if anybody wants to see the old road from Oysterville, Nakata, get a hold of us, come up the house, and it's only a few feet right there. I didn't even know it was there, and that Sue Holloway used to ride her horse on it as a kid. But the property is beautiful, and what I want to emphasize is that you would know, but right off the highway, There's a ridge right off the highway. There's a cedar forest in there. I mean, cedars like that, and spruce like that. And you wouldn't believe it, that forest is so close to the highway, and it's primitive and gorgeous. And if anybody wants to just come and see it, I'd be happy to show them. The vegetables come from the same property where Wallkoski had his house. There's a little ridge about 5 feet, and it's right down near the bay, about 5 feet high, so it doesn't flood on the big winter tides. And he had a 2-story house there, and that's where we have our garden. That's where these are grown. It used to be a vegetable garden, and now with Todd coming home, it's a flower garden. And you find flowers out there in the truck, you're welcome to those. Those are Todd's, I don't have any. I thought we were going to plant more vegetables. And where are we going to get room to plant them? So, okay. Anyway, it's a beautiful piece of property, I just love it. And if you want to come and see it, I'd be happy to show it. I just think it's marvelous.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sure Dobbie will be lingering, and you're welcome to meet as well. Just a really quick one update that 2 weeks from now will be Michael Parker, who is probably not as well known to as many of you, but he is a very well-known photographer. And he fits in here. It's because, Michael, I want to know the stories behind the photographs. And he says, yeah, I get it. We'll see how he does, but please do come and continue this wonderful time together. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.